Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I am delighted to welcome back my guest, Joseph Crane. Hello, Joseph.
This must be our fourth time we've talked, something like that.
We just have so much fun. We have to keep doing it again, I think. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do it all again is because of this fabulous book of yours. So,
You mean this one?
yeah, that one, blending into your background there. It's called Astrology and the Lives of People, Finding Compassion, Character, and Heroism in the Horoscope. And so I'm reading it for a second time. I haven't quite finished my second read, so you may yet be invited back. But I felt reading it a second time that there's so much in here that we could talk about that I thought, wouldn't it be lovely? And so here you are. Thank you. And in particular, what interested me was what you were discussing in the book, or you are discussing in the book, about lunar and solar souls. And so it's looking at the soul from two different perspectives. And also you look at the history of how these two things develop separately. So maybe you could give us a bite-sized
That's all.
chunk of all of the history, Joseph.
Well, actually, I started my book by talking, if you recall, about grave practices in the ancient world. Both China and Egypt, Greece as well, because that actually changed over a while, and how they would make the separation between the part of us that gets fed, that grave offerings are given to, and that part of us which ascends or descends or goes elsewhere. And we even see this in modern um, fiction with like zombies and vampires and things like that. But it's basically the difference between that part of us, we'll call it governed by necessity, which needs to stay alive. We really like staying alive. We don't know what we're staying alive for, but it's ingrained in us. When there's a threat to us, including when it's too damn hot where you are, there's a certain anxiety that we feel. Whereas the solar quality is that part of us that wants to identify with something larger, that is creative, that manifests something about our uniqueness, our specialness. And so in the ancient world and in, modern Christianity and places like that, we are left behind bodily, whereas we, can sail away to meet our karma or to go to heaven, hell, or in my case, a long time in purgatory. And but it's really important in how we make the distinction between astrologically between the sun and the moon. It's really simple.
And that's what I liked. I liked the way in which you were exploring the means by which we come at this distinction. Essentially, we can sum it up, body and soul.
Well, except that we are we are also embodied. So people who are athletes, who are dancers, they use their bodies in a solar way. When I like to run distances, but when I see marathoners finish, they're relieved, their body is like, really torn up. That's the lunar part, whereas they are so damn proud and they can't wait to tell their grandchildren in 40 years. That's the solar part. And there's nothing very metaphysical about this. There's nothing very otherworldly about this. This is how we function.
Yes. I think it's still that it still amounts to understanding the body and the soul as two different things, however much embodied the soul might be.
How about the body soul and the soul soul?
Yeah, it's I think what we're doing when we're looking at a chart is looking at how well integrated the two different impulses are. And I think that's why it's useful to separate, to understand the individual needs of each and how they can then be together, because that is the challenge of
And
life, it's the
sometimes
embodiment.
sometimes they can't be together. I think I use a phrase like dynamic disequilibrium in the book or something like that. That there are times in which we throw caution to the wind, usually when we're younger. It's like, I know this is stupid, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is when our parents freak out. And now, if we're parents, we freak out because our kids are doing the same thing. So there are times in which we throw caution to the wind, but there are also times in which we sort of um, retrench. We limit ourselves. And, we could talk about the difference between necessity and will, that our lunar function deals with the necessities of life, which is body, but which is also our sense of belonging. Also, how we manage our daily life in terms of its rhythms. At the same time, that's not the whole thing, and there's a part of us that wants to sort of um, manifest who we are in whatever way there is to do it. So with clients, it's often some kind of cross between what am I going to do? I'm freaked out because I'm going to lose my job and blah, all that. Or it's like, I'm in love with so and so. It's going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. That's not that's not equilibrium. That's not maintenance. That's creativity. So,
I think that's right. And I think that there is a difference between that drive or that instinct that we associate with the moon that's towards survival, and the solar side, which is about growth and expression and the exploration of the world, but also the exploration of self and identity,
mhm,
is one of
mhm,
the reasons why so many people will talk about the sun as the sun sign as something we grow into, because it's that part of us that's growing and
mhm.
that needs to be nurtured. And where the lunar principle comes in, by attending to our needs, we feel secure. And
Exactly.
by feeling secure, we're creating the foundation for that ability, that confidence to go into the world and explore.
Mhm.
Tell us more about the will, because I think this is really important.
Okay. Um, we could also make that distinction. Um, sometimes it's convenient to think in terms of like yin and yang, talking about the sun and the moon in terms of will. And I think that I don't think that goes all the way. It doesn't go far enough because yin is usually described as fairly passive. Is that we have yang as the bright side of the moon and yin is like the dark side of the moon. And not to confuse us with a Pink Floyd song. And the fact is that, and we can see this in the chart, if you have like moon in Aries or moon in Scorpio, you're going to be really protective and you're going to lash out when threatened. You're not going to, what's going to be anxiety for you is feeling helpless and feeling powerless. And so you're going to have a great deal of energy, we could call it will, toward restoring things to normal, to subduing what's threatening us. And that can take place in any number of levels, from the physical to the interpersonal to the cultural. And but then there's the solar will, which is how we make those creative choices that we make in life. How did you get into astrology? It probably wasn't because you were good, it was the only way you could think of to make money. You weren't forced into it. Nobody tied you down and showed you astrological charts and made you talk about them or they were going to do something evil to you. No, it's because you wanted to. You longed for it. It made you feel great. It made you feel helpful. It made you feel however it did. I mean, that's one tiny example. Um, I use in the book, I talk about the addictive process. And, what first starts as, gee, I really like being high. I feel so good. I feel so energetic, especially some of the pharmaceuticals you could take are really good at that. But then you have to continue doing the same thing just to feel normal. It's like this, the moon has, our lunar needs for survival have taken over from our solar needs for creativity. And often we don't even notice the difference, but we begin to feel anxious without what it is that we're addicted to, whether it's gambling or sex or drugs or whatever. So in my book, I talk about the um, sort of the perversion of the will, which is trying to get better all by myself, by my own willpower, which is only a recipe for disaster. Instead, you need to build up supports and to relax that kind of firm hold that the will has on us. I could keep talking, but I won't.
Well, I think, that there's a lot in what you've said there. And, a little while back, quite a while back, watching some gardening program or other,
Ah,
one of the gardeners said something along the lines of, you know, if a plant isn't doing well and you just attend to its needs, odds are it will recover because it has the will to live.
mm-hmm.
And I think that there is something in that the will to survive, which I think, as you've pointed out, is a very lunar thing. And then there's the will to grow, which and thrive, which
Mm-hmm.
more the solar principle. But I think also what made me smile is when you were talking about yin and yang, because this is precisely the subject of a talk I'm giving at the Astrological Lodge of London. And as we record this, I'm putting the finishing touches on it.
I'd love to go, but I'm not in the neighborhood.
No, you're not. It's online, so you could.
Ah,
But the thing that really stood out for me is this assumption that we have that yin is passive. And it is an assumption that bears some challenging,
mhm.
as you've just, you've talked about it specifically in the context of the moon in Aries or the moon in Scorpio. But for all that, we could legitimately argue that yin appears to be more passive. I think the matriarchal energy of Cancer, for instance,
Huh?
would take issue with that
Yeah, absolutely.
energy.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a question of style of action.
Mhm.
I would say that yin has a different style of action to yang, and that the two are intimately linked
Mhm.
in a dance of observation and response with a different style of response. And I think that
What do you mean by that?
I
Different
mean
style.
that
Yeah.
yang would tend to be very direct, whereas yin is going to take action, make no mistake, but it will do so perhaps less obviously. And let's go back to Cancer. It doesn't exactly move forwards, the crab, it moves sideways. And I think that that's a very good description. And of this dance that goes on, um, where both are taking action, both are responsive, both are listening, both are observing, but they're doing it differently.
They
And
have different agendas.
and I think when you come back to the moon and the sun, I think that principle is very present there,
Mhm.
where they're both a part of us, and they're two parts that are either going to be in sync, i.e., maybe they're in the same sign or they're trine, or there's going to be some tension between
Mhm.
them. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying it is a fact that there's either going to be tension between the sun and moon, or there's going to be more fluidity between them.
Or they learn to adapt to each other
Exactly.
while 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 also appreciating the differences.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, looking, just thinking about it from that point of view as I'm reading your book, it is so important that we have this understanding of ourselves if we are to have any success in relating to others.
Of course, because we're not really that different from each other. We express things in different ways. We have different ways of dancing. Some people like to back lead, make it look like the other person's leading, but they're actually the one in charge. Women are particularly good at this, I've heard.
It's that expression, the backseat driver.
Ah, yes.
So I'm not saying that women are backseat drivers. I just want to make this clear. I'm just saying that, where you're talking about where somebody is leading without appearing to be leading. And I think that's that principle that's there. And I think it's it's a very important tool when we're thinking about who we are and trying to distinguish between what makes us tick in terms of our needs. It's very important because, from a psychological perspective, it is a very well known fact that it's the subconscious that rules the show. In other words, we are driven by our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And our feelings, if we don't understand them, it means we don't understand what we need. So I guess what I'm saying is we need to understand what we need, because what if our needs are not being met at a subconscious level, there is a feeling response which we may or may not be aware of, or we may be aware of it and not understand it, which is the subject of many of my conversations with my therapy clients who come in as though they're bringing in a recalcitrant a child and saying, look, I don't know what to do with this child, you know. and and I sit there and talk about what it is of the behavior of the child that's so distasteful to them.
Mm,
At the bottom of it is needs that are not being met.
of course.
And these emotions which they wish to regulate, i.e. suppress, are inconvenient. And so we have to come back and understand what the needs are. So if we want that solar principle of expansion and growth and creativity, we need to have that solid foundation of security, which brings us back to your book.
But yes, and feelings are not simply lunar. One difference is between anxiety and depression. The moon is about anxiety and restoration of feeling calm and content. Sun is on one end of the spectrum is depression, the other end it's engagement. And so in terms of and so feelings can go in either direction. I mean, how many people, especially when they're having like Uranus sun transits or something like that, they're feeling bottled up. They're feeling that they have no room to maneuver. They're feeling they're spending all their time just taking care of business and not doing what they're made to do. There are also people who are freaked out because they've gone too far in a certain direction. They don't know how to take care of themselves and get the rent paid and get, food on the table for their kids and things like that. And so, there are gradations, but I like to think of traditionally, astrology was very lunar in its presentations. Like, okay, what is my position in society? How am I going? How is my health going to be? How's my, am I going to get married? What's my marriage going to be like? Kids, sort of the containers in life. And in the 20th century, astrology became very solar. It's like, what is my purpose? What does the universe want from me? And the fact is that we require both. Not the same amount at the same time. It goes through development. But we need to be sensitive to both parts of who we are.
It's interesting you should say that, because my experience as a therapist and as an astrologer also, because these are the conversations that I have with clients.
Mm-hmm.
We profess in our society to be all about individual growth. But how many times am I brought, and this time it's literally brought children who are struggling in school,
yeah,
doing things that are meeting the lunar side that you just talked about, ticking the boxes of what you need in order to have a secure and safe position in society, to the detriment of what they actually, I'm going to say, their soul is crying out to do. And so, although we profess to be in this society that should be offering everybody the opportunity to be very solar, the reality is, for most people, that lunar need for security and survival still rules the show, I think.
It's particularly difficult for adolescents because the desire to belong is basic. To have friends, to have a meaningful sort of role in your world. At the same time, you can't stand the people you're being friends with because you know you better than that. Or at least that's some of what I experienced as I was in my maldevelopmental years, or my maladaptive years. So, um, and so we can be sensitive to all of these. And I think what astrology does is it gives us a language, it gives us a symbolic system that we can actually work with this directly without pathologizing one way or another.
That is such a key thing without pathologizing. Again, I get clients who come to me with diagnoses, with, the long names for what are actually fundamental, just human experiences
Right.
and feelings. And I say to them, okay, is that label particularly helpful to you?
Right.
And very often, for some it is, because it's like a peg on which to wear this hat, on which to hang this particular hat. It gives me at least an understanding that my experience is I'm not the only person experiencing this,
Right.
and that there's actually a name to this, and it's a thing. It's not, I'm not just imagining this. On the other hand, there are others who feel completely trapped and who
Mm-hmm.
say, is this all there is to me? And so I tend to want to wash away the labels and go, okay, well, now that you've got a name for it, can we just set it aside and talk about what you're actually experiencing?
Right.
And look at it at a human level, and go from there to explore what's underneath this. And now that we've got this label, okay, it might be handy for a bit. Can we just put it there? Because it's really descriptive of a condition. It is not who you are. And I think that when we begin to work in that way, it's very liberating for my clients.
The important word that you used was condition. It's conditions are conditional.
Yeah.
Conditional means they are transitory. They can come and go, they can increase or decrease. They can move.
I also thought it was interesting that you talked about, you used the word depression in relation to the sun. And I think that's such a crucial connection you've made there, because the sun is meant to shine. And if it is in a situation where it cannot shine,
Mm-hmm.
that is a depression of the light, which is the life force or the soul within us. And again, that is the subject of many a conversation with clients, where they don't feel that they are allowed to shine, or they don't feel that they even know that they can shine. And so it's such an important thing. So I really like that you used the word depression in relation to that, because it is the equivalent, really, to weeks, if not months, of cloudy skies.
And often, and it's very interesting, I talk about the sun as both identity and also identification. That we will shine from the reflection of something outside of ourselves. And I think of all these people with pictures of sports heroes or movie stars or rock or musicians. And they're shining from the reflected light of whoever it happens to be. And often that's like a transitional object. That's a key step. It's like, this is your identity. Okay, what about this person, this act, this music, whatever that inspires you? And and there's a way to develop one's identity from that pattern of identification. It's like, okay, I am so and so. This is where I belong. This is what gives me joy.
You use the word hero, and of course, the solar principle is very linked with the need to be a hero of some kind. Tell us more about how
Alas.
you feel. Tell us more about how you see this.
Well, I I make a big deal in my book about differentiating solar and lunar heroism. And the solar, we all know this, it's in all kinds of movies and stories and whatever. Um, and I actually have a chapter in my book where I talk about sun signs. It's like, okay, there's a hero's journey to all of these, some kind of overcoming of obstacles and becoming greater. And that's good. But the lunar part is, and we saw that obviously during the pandemic. It's like people who respond, people who are anonymous, people who do what they can in situation by situation to be beneficial. And that's because it's lunar, it's private. Nobody rhapsodizes about it. Nobody has you know, an epic poem about being a lunar hero. Doesn't happen.
No,
But,
and I think that is a fundamental yin yang difference.
okay.
This is these are the unsung heroes. The yin energy is unsung because it is not quite as visible.
Yeah.
And so, we think about the moon being linked with mothers, etc., and women, and you can see why it is,
Sure.
that
Sure.
women have been unsung heroines
Mhm.
because what they do tends to be at home and not so visible, or has historically tended to be at home and
Yeah.
not so visible,
That's
and
right.
therefore not quite as glamorous
Mhm.
as Achilles and and Hercules and the Aegean stables and everything else. Where, wow, that's great action, and rescuing and all of this. But was Penelope not a heroine for keeping the home fires burning all the
Well,
while that her husband was away for years and years and years? What is going on? And of course, that lack of recognition in mythology is full of festering women, who are going
yes.
seething because their efforts are not recognized. And I think this is again, coming back to what you're saying, and I like that very much.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously ideally it's gender neutral, and we often see that kind of lunar heroism in like neighbors. When there's a problem with something next door and people, rally around to help, or um, when somebody's partners in the hospital and especially the kids in the hospital, people in the neighborhood will come and bring them soup.
It's that kindness, and you're right. Of course, this is not gender. It is about two different types of energy, yin and yang. They have played out differently historically,
Yeah.
but it's those little moments. And I was just thinking recently, a couple of my students have done what to them are very small acts of kindness to help me out because I'm so busy.
Hmm.
And for me, those small things they're doing are nothing short of great acts of heroism
Yeah. Yes.
because they've stepped in. They've noticed that I needed a little bit of help in
Yeah.
these two different areas, and they've gone, "Oh, would you like me to do that for you?" And the relief that I've felt when they've said, "Would you like me to do that for you?" And I
Right.
think, really, you're willing to do that for me? Thank you so much. These are not solar heroes. They're very much lunar things. But my appreciation is as great as when I lost my father and a friend brought me some meals that she had
Sure. Yeah.
and said, "I didn't think you'd be feel like cooking." And I thought, oh, how kind. That's
Exactly.
the lunar heroism that we're talking
Exactly.
about.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, what was I going to say? Well, next question. Next question. I'll come up with what I was going to say and then answer.
Well, I actually that this is the stuff of your book is the exploration, the deep exploration of these different principles and how they manifest in a chart.
And there's lots of astrology here.
There's huge amounts of astrology. This is astrology. So this is why I'm thoroughly enjoying my second read of your book. And
Oh,
a reminder to everyone that the book in question is Astrology and the Lives of People, Finding Compassion, Character, and Heroism.
and I'm going to send this recording to all my friends who haven't gotten to my book yet.
Oh, well, Joseph, thank you so much. Please remind everyone of where they can find you if they want to know more about your work.
Oh, my email address is joseph.crane2, as in the numeral, at gmail.com. And um, my website is astrologyinstitute.com. And yes, I'm very happy with the domain name.
Okay, so I will be putting a link to all of this
Thank you.
in the description box. Thank you so much for coming back to talk about your marvelous book.
Anytime, Anna. Be good.
Thank
Be
you.
warm, be content.
I think warm is the easy bit today when it's
Warm? No, no, no. Be warm instead of hot. Big
Thank you
difference.
very much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be talking about magic and astrology. Until then, a reminder just before we go to look at the description box for details of how to find the book, as well as Joseph, and of course, my own website and the link to Substack. Have a wonderful week and goodbye.